Good Sunday morning. A little bit of a Suburban Ford 7 Sports Cave Extra with Free Press Lions beat writer Dave Birkett. Dave, the Lions, the draft. It's always something that's such an interesting topic year in and year out because of what they do year in and year out. I mean, when you look at this year's draft, I think we can all agree that there's maybe only one, maybe two guys that are can't-miss prospects, and everyone else is relatively even, at least in the first round. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Talking from talking to scouts across the league so far, I think there's a consensus. 5, 6, 7, 8 guys at the top of the draft that everybody thinks is going to be, going that first 8 or 10 picks. And then after that, there's a whole lot of balance, especially at the positions the Lions need most: offensive line, defensive tackle, cornerback. You talk to people about guys at those positions, the prospects are really evenly matched, and guys have different favorites. I mean, offensive line, I put Eric Flowers #1 as the first offensive lineman in my mock draft to the New York Giants, 9th overall. There's some guys that think he'll go later in the round. Andres Pete, who I had going to the Lions with the 23rd pick, some guys think he'll be the first offensive tackle taken. So there's just no consensus about these guys, and it's a matter of scheme fit. It's a matter of what you're looking for in the position a lot.
The Lions have the 23rd pick, and I think that we talked a lot this morning about how, and you've already written, they should take offensive tackle. I brought up the point that the Lions for so many years have made the case that they've taken the best player available, maybe not of a positional need.
Yeah.
Maybe tight end last year was a great example. Eric Ebron was not really, tight end was not a position of need, yet they said he was the best player available, we went and took him. I think the Lions have matured past that. From being, they're a playoff team, they only lose Ndamukong Suh. They relatively fill that gap with Haloti Ngata. They lost some other guys in the D-line, so they'll have to, but that's a general attrition that most teams see. This is the same team that went to the playoffs last year and went 11-5. They can't screw up this draft and take somebody that doesn't help them in a position of need, right?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, when I look at the Lions right now on paper, they don't strike me as being as complete a team, as good a team as they were when they ended last year. And that's not to say they're not going to be, but they have some holes. Defensive tackle, you mentioned losing Sue, Nick Fairley, C.J. Mosley. Offensive line, no Rob Sims, no Dominic Raiola. You can argue how well those guys played, but right now you don't have a starting left guard on your roster. So if you're looking for a need to fill, that's probably the biggest one. And then running back, you cut Reggie Bush. I think they still need something at that position. Most of the other spots, they're clear. They're back 7. They have all their starters back. But I think when you're talking about needs for the Lions, it's those positions that really stand out, and especially on the offensive line, because they've had, and Jim Caldwell has made a point this whole offseason to say they need to get better. They need to protect better. Matthew Stafford took a career high in sacks last year. They didn't run the ball particularly well. They need to fortify that offensive front somehow.
The Lions win games in the NFL, in the college game, in the high school game. The best front lines control the line of scrimmage, and you can win the game. Look at what Seattle does year in and year out. You think they do that with a bad offensive line? Absolutely not. That being said, is the first round pick for the Lions the kid from that you just talked about?
Stanford. Pete. Now, look, I mean, I think he's going to be in the mix. I think when it comes down to it at the end of the day, they have these needs, so they have some options. When you get to that point in the draft, you're probably not going to get one of your blue chippers, one of your top 8 or 10 guys on the board. So you're left to sort through a bunch of similarly ranked guys, and that's when you can, to your point, fill those needs maybe a little bit more. And I think there's going to be a handful of offensive linemen in the mix. It's going to be a guy like Pete if he's there, Cameron Irving from Florida State, the center that can play just about any position on the offensive line, La'el Collins from LSU. There's just a number of guys. Cedric Ogbuyi from Texas A&M, I wouldn't rule him out. I think there's some guys that can fill their needs at that position. Defensive tackle, though, too, they brought a couple of those guys in, and you look at a guy like Malcolm Brown from Texas, maybe Eric Armstead from Oregon if he fell. Another guy that I've mentioned a little bit that most people don't have going in the first round, Mario Edwards. The Lions like him and his upside. I think they're going to have some options, and so really it's just a matter of which of those guys go off the board earliest and who's going to be left at 23. If you remember a couple years ago, Riley Reif, nobody thought he'd be there at 23. That's when the Lions picked 23rd, 2012. He slipped. They took him. He's been starting the last 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Mark Mayhew has a lot of choices. He said as much in his press conference thing where he didn't tell us anything of real note. But he did talk about a couple of key, namely players, Todd Gurley being one of them. I don't think he's slipping past the Jets. A lot of people think that running backs. I agree. We talked in the Sports Cave earlier this morning about how, look, you can get a running back in the second and the third round that's going to be very serviceable. Tevin Coleman, Duke Johnson type of player who can come in and be effective. If Gurley's there at 23, though,
I take him.
You
I
do?
would take him, yeah. I mean, I know there's a lot of concerns about him. I know the position has been devalued in the NFL here in recent years, but I think he can be a difference maker. And I think if you can get somebody at that position, especially when you put him in the fold with some of the other weapons that the Lions have, Calvin Johnson, Golden Tate, theoretically Eric Ebron, I think that really completes the offense. You still need help on that offensive line, but I think that is enough of a weapon that's a guy that you would have a tough time passing on up there. Now, look, I think a lot of what goes into, you want to take the best player, but when you're looking at three guys at three different positions, I think you do have to weigh that, well, what can I get in round two? What can I get in round three at those positions? And this is a really good year for running backs, and there's going to be 7 or 8 that go in the first 3 rounds. And I think Tevin Coleman, you mentioned Duke Johnson from Miami, Amir Abdullah from Nebraska. I think there's a number of guys that can fit and be that. The Lions are never going to be a one-back team, but he can be in that rotation and be a contributor as a rookie.
The guy I'd like to see in the Honolulu Blues, Melvin Gordon from Wisconsin. I think that kid, he was second in the Heisman, if I wasn't mistaken. Real quick, I want
to... on Gordon, I talked to a scout the other day who loves him. He said he's top 15 worthy.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if the Lions would go that route. I mean, I think he's a guy that could be there because I think Gurley's going to be the first running back off the board, but Melvin Gordon, Jim Caldwell has taken a running back in the first round before. His first year in Indianapolis, they drafted a running back. I wouldn't rule the Gordon pick out. I don't think it'll happen, but I wouldn't rule it out either. There are some people that like him across the league.
A couple of things. I think that over time, the Lions never go into a draft saying, well, let's pick a guy who's going to bust.
Right.
No team does that. No team wants that. But when I think of the Lions, who evaluates and who makes the final call at the end of the day? Is it the head coach? Is it the general manager? Is it the team president? Is it the scout? When they come to a consensus, who's the president, if you will, making the final call?
No, it's Martin Mayhew on football decisions. I mean, those are his picks in the draft, and I think he'll tell you, without going into details, that he learned a lot from that 2011 draft when they took Titus Young and they took Mikel Lesher and they took some of those guys that had problems, but especially Titus Young. That was maybe him being swayed a little bit. Jim Schwartz was a big Titus Young fan. Sean Jefferson, the receivers coach, was a big Titus Young fan. I think Martin maybe gave into their wishes a little bit too much and went against some scouts' advice because, look, the Lions have a scout in Idaho. The Lions knew full well Titus Young's problems ahead of time. Yeah. So that guy was thoroughly vetted ahead of time, and they had people that did not want to take him. But I think Martin listened to the wrong people on that one. I think Martin learned from that, and now he wants to be certain of the guy that he takes. And he said as much in his press conference the other day that, especially in the first 2 rounds, that's where he spends 50% of his time, leading up to the draft is vetting and analyzing those guys. And I think, especially early on, that's when Mayhew makes a pick. Later on, that's when the position coaches and the scouts really stand up on a table and go to bat for a guy.
Should be an interesting draft, and just from the Lions' perspective, but I got to ask you this. How much movement do you expect on Thursday night between teams that are at the top trading down? I know there's talk about Philly trying to get up to get Mariota, and there's Jacksonville doesn't know what to do with their pick, and then Tennessee doesn't know what to do with their pick. Can we see a really interesting first round? I mean, it is great theater. It is terrible that we pay so much attention to a non-sports event this way, but it is an interesting, fun, with fantasy football being the way it is. Right. People love the draft for fantasy football. This is kind of the same thing.
Think about it last year. Nobody would have expected Buffalo trades up, gives up their first this year to go up and get Sammy Watkins. The Browns trade back down. Then they move back up to get Justin Gilbert. So I think you never know what's going to happen at the top of the draft. This draft doesn't strike me as much as there being those guys that you need to go up and get. You mentioned it, off the top, that there was only a handful of guys who are really, sort of that can't miss prospect. A Leonard Williams, a Dante Fowler, maybe. If you need a quarterback, I guess you go up to get one of those 2 guys. But I don't know how much movement there's going to be at top, but I think there's enough guys that will have similar grades and enough teams that will have different tastes at the end of the day that back half of the first round could be kind of interesting.
That's Dave Birkett from the Free Press. He's going to Chicago starting on Tuesday. Follow him online and on Twitter. Dave, thanks so much for being here.
Anytime.
Have fun in Chicago, and we'll see you later.